in a world where trauma is real, where people seek out distraction from their internal lives and relationships with others, and where no one is taught healthy self-care. Help was needed. In 2019, the mission began. Find a way to help people understand and better their mental health. Seek out ways to explore relationships and how they work. Fight against the stigmas that surround counseling and therapy. And, most importantly,
do all of that so you don't have to be a therapist to understand it. Hey everybody. Welcome to Season 2 of Therapist Theater. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA, and every week a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker joins me here in the theater to talk about a movie that we've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. Is it really already March? This year is flying by. I wonder if that means that I'm having lots of fun. I can for sure tell you that I had fun talking to this week's guest, Rob Curwen. Rob is a licensed marital and family therapist and is certified in emotionally focused therapy. He and his wife Summer, who was a guest on the show last season, founded Hope Tree Counseling LLC, which is located in Franklin, Tennessee. Hope Tree Counseling provides individual counseling for children, teens, and adults, as well as counseling for couples and families. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and while you're doing that, help other people find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. I was actually starting to like you. I was even thinking about not killing you. This is what happens when you try to dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Rob.
Yes.
How's it going?
It's going well.
Welcome to the theater. I am so excited to have you on. I was telling somebody the other day, I've tried for a year to have you come on, and here you are.
Well, I appreciate your persistence.
Oh my gosh,
good to be here.
Absolutely. I was thinking about on the way here this morning. I met you, I think, although briefly, at an EFT training during school and externship. You were like a mentor-y kind of helper. I don't know what you guys would have called each other.
I think I just showed up.
Yeah. But we had all these groups that would get together and kind of like act out and process, and like you and Miriam and Terry and maybe Kelly Bork would like come around and then just be like, you guys are doing great.
Right.
No, don't do it that way. Do it that
Get to feel like know-it-alls.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a reason that you guys were there.
Sure. Actually, I think we met before that, though. I think we met at your retail job.
That was after.
Oh, was that after?
Yeah, that's how I knew who you were.
Oh, was it? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But all that, I mean, I'm super glad to meet you. And then even when I was getting the practice started, was just like, hey, could I take you out to coffee and just pick your brain and
I remember that.
Figure out, how to not get audited by the IRS.
That's something we're supposed to know that too.
Yeah, there wasn't really a class on how to run your practice as a business.
No, and it's not really why most of us become therapists.
Yeah, that's one of those like, I got to do that too kind of moments.
That's right, the business side,
which
is important if you're going to stay, if you're going to be able to see clients. Unfortunately, got to take care of that side
past
too.
a month or two. Yeah.
All right.
Well, I like to start every conversation with my guest with the question, why therapy? Why do you do what you do?
Okay. Goes back for me. Goes back to 1998. So August 1998, if we were talking at the beginning of that, or if you saw me at the beginning of August 1998, life would have looked like I had it all dialed in. This is a second career for me. So at the time, I was a CPA. I was working for one of the big six at the time. I think it's big four now, but it's one of the big accounting firms and doing public accounting. And again, when
like
you're
with individuals, like you would do their stuff, or
no, my clients were like Guess jeans, Skechers shoes before they went public.
So corporate type.
Yeah,
Okay.
big clients that are traded, publicly traded companies.
All right.
This was the job. If you're an accountant, this is the job that most of them wanted. And I was married, and we had been married now for 3 years.
Oh, that reminds me. You are joining a very elite club on the show.
Am I?
Up until now, we've only had 2 guests who have been married to each other.
Okay, yes.
And now you are completing another pair.
I'm so glad.
It was just Terry and Chris Murphy, and now Summer and Rob Curwen.
I'm so glad I get to be part of that.
Yeah.
Part of that club, especially with the Murphys.
Which I think is fascinating, and maybe one day in the future have one of the couples on, the pair on.
That'd be really fun.
Because people ask Leanne and I all the time, she's a social worker, like, you guys must just have the most healthy, most communicative marriage. And I'm like,
right.
What?
Yeah, we're actually still human too.
Yeah, we're people. We just know the clinical terms for the ways that we mess up.
Right. It's funny. I kind of joke because when I went through schooling, I got my schooling done before summer. And then when we would argue, she could say, "Oh, is that what you tell your clients?" Kind of.
That's a burn.
And now I can say that to her.
Too. Yeah, yeah. Leanne's pulled that out sometimes too.
Right.
Like if I feel stuck in a conflict, she'll be like, "What would you tell clients?" I'm like, "Good perspective shift. I like that."
Yes, it's helpful. Yeah,
so you were an accountant dealing with these big.
Yeah. So
accounts.
it was demanding and again, it was the top of the field, and I don't say that to boast or anything, but just to say, if you're gonna like accounting, this is the job you want. And again, and accountants, I think it's a great profession. I have good friends that are accountants. I have clients that are. It's great, but it just, for me, it wasn't at the time though. Where I was, and which wasn't really a healthy place, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I was achieving, right, and that's what that was about for me. And I was married. Life was kind of unfolding the way that it was supposed to unfold. So you
had what you would have called at the time success.
Yes.
Like you would have said, I'm a successful person.
Yes.
Okay.
At the end of August, sometime towards the end, that wife told me that she didn't want to be married to me anymore, essentially. And that began my life it just fell apart. That week that I found out, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't
Had
watch
you
TV.
felt disconnected at the time, or was this like a tidal wave out of nowhere?
For me, it was out of nowhere. I would have said we're best friends.
Mm-hmm.
It was out of nowhere. Now, what that did was get me into counseling. The only thing I could do during that week was read scripture, actually. And I wouldn't have said I was a Christian at the time. But that was my one thing that would take me out of the service or out of that experience.
What was it, if you wouldn't have said that you had a professed faith at the time, what was it that made you go, oh, this could be a way even to have that idea, like I could find comfort by doing this?
There was this church that I would drive by on the way to my office, and it had this marquee, and it would always say funny things. And one time it said,
church signs actually did that.
Yeah, it said if Noah was smart, he would have left those mosquitoes off the ark. And I thought, that's pretty funny. So I wasn't a Christian, but we needed someone to marry us, and so went to that church and got married 3 years prior at that church. So when things were, I kind of had a sense like something was missing. We would go to that church and then just proceed with life after. It wasn't, it wasn't her, my ex-wife, her history was in the church. And so it was kind of more kind of her kind of getting us there. And so we were but once life was crumbling, which I found out at that church, there was altar calls. I took her up. I said, we got to go. Something's not right. I had a sense something wasn't right. Took her up, and that was where I found out, things were way worse than I thought they were.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the entry where the elder there, I don't remember exactly how it unfolded, but that was just where the peace was I could read scripture. And I remember going through the Gospels, and by the time I got to Luke, I'm like, haven't I read all this before? Like, I didn't realize that they kind of tell the same story.
Yeah.
But it was just a way to get out of the situation. And I ended up from that church then getting hooked up with an amazing counselor, a guy named Jim Beebe. And that's where life really changed.
Wow.
That for me was also then where I had to confront that I had actually had an addiction to pornography. And so I can look back at when I was about 12 or 13, and my parents were going through a divorce. And that's right about the time I found a box of Playboys on my paper route. And
Just like out in the open somewhere?
it was trash day. So it was trash day. They were being thrown away. And I found this box and thought, what a bonanza, which didn't realize really what it was. And so that going back, so if you go back from 1998, where at this point I'm 27 and had this 14-year, sometimes acting out 3 times a day, now looking back to see, I didn't have a relationship with my ex-wife. It wasn't a full relationship, although at the time I couldn't have really said that.
It was as full as you could go.
As full as I could go.
But it wasn't full for her.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so it began this process. So she didn't want to be married, but she didn't want to get divorced. So we went through this process, and I really didn't want to get divorced. And 6 months later, though, we ended up separating, and so we were kind of seeing each other maybe one time a week at the most. And but in the meantime, I'm okay with that because I realized, like, I've really got a lot of work here to do. It was just really opening up my eyes of how I was actually I was an addict really, and trying to find myself. I mean, I look back and I see this is how I put up with a job doing accounting that was really not, my soul was really dying in that job, but I would ignore all that. I wasn't even in touch with any part of me that wanted to have meaning or, and I would say also was a workaholic. That was my second addiction. My co-addiction was this, it was a lot of work, but it was also this success, and the status of what that job was meant something to me, and in terms of my identity. And so I'm doing all this work, and while we're the marriage, I'm hopeful we're going to be back together. So it was August 98. If you fast forward to Super Bowl Sunday 2000 is where finally she wanted to be done. And so we began the process of divorce. But at this point I had gone to, I left public accounting because it's really demanding in terms of hours. And I was working in private industry still as for an accounting job. We were a profit center, which is unusual. Usually you're a cost center if you're an accountant. But we would basically go and buy tax credits, which you could buy a $1 tax credit, depending on the deal, for anywhere between 70 and, maybe like 95 cents, which that doesn't sound like a lot, but that spread, when you put it in $100 million deal, ends up being quite a bit of money. And it's all tax free. And for a publicly traded company, that means something on what they have to say their tax rate is. So anyway, I saw that again to say, this is the job. If you want to be an accountant, this is the job in terms of what it was. And but I remember being in this room with all these binders and thinking, I can't stand this. Like, I'm dying here. And yet I didn't know what I wanted to do. And here my marriage had fallen apart. I'm in a career I don't want to be in. And my community is changing now, which was actually the positive. That was my real resource, is when we had separated, I moved in with a good friend. And what's ironic is that good friend now is in my old job, and doing awesome.
Oh, wow.
He's doing great. But I had, it was just, life was not but I didn't know where to go.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in the location was in Westwood Village, which I don't know if you're familiar with Westwood Village, but it's to the south are all these office buildings, and then to the north is UCLA. And so Westwood Village is a bunch of restaurants and stores, but the mix is business people and students, and it gets pretty crowded at lunchtime.
That's a really weird intersection of a Venn diagram.
Mm-hmm.
Like
It's
you
very
just have
interesting.
the business people and the students converging into the same.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's great, and it is interesting, and there's also a lot of homeless. And it's Southern California, so it's lunchtime. I'm eating outside because it's nice and sunny and a nice day, and I'm sitting there by myself eating my burrito outside and watching all the people walk around, and it's really crowded on the intersections again, and busy, people walking all over, and thinking about life and where I'm going and what to do. And I see this guy in a wheelchair, and he's trying to get people's attention, and someone tries to give him $1, thinking he's a homeless person. He doesn't want the dollar, but the guy just keeps going. Nobody's paying attention. So I get up and I walk over, and I ask him what's going on. He can't really talk, based on what was going on for him. He wasn't able to talk, but he could hand gesture. And what he hand gestured was his little joystick had fallen off his wheelchair, and he wasn't able to go. And so I got
It was like a motorized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got the joystick. I had to go into the restaurant and get some pliers, and got it all fixed. And, he's on his way. And meanwhile, I got to get back to work. And I'm walking back to work thinking, this is a good feeling. Like, I just helped somebody. Like, that feels good. And I thought I would pay money to have this feeling. And then I realized I think I'm going to have to pay money to have this feeling. I'm going to give up a business kind of trajectory and go into helping. So, but I still didn't know, so I knew that I wanted to help people, but I didn't really know what
Something
direction.
in you connected in that moment that didn't with accounting.
Right. And again, accounting is a honorable and great profession.
Yeah.
And we need accountants, and it's good, but just for me, it just wasn't for me.
But I also think that, the way that you were describing yourself in the story, oftentimes I've described myself pre-therapy as a client as being divorced from my own heart.
Yes.
And so it sounds like you were kind of in that same place, and then through your work as a client, you began to get to know yourself more, connect with yourself more. And so, naturally you're going to change in that process. Right. And maybe the person that you were changing into, maybe the person you were, accounting worked, because any number of reasons, because of the success, you could say, hey, I have an identity. I have kind of tangible proof that I am a success and I work hard and that I'm important and I have value. That's probably the center of all that, is the value part. But you're discovering, there's another way. Yeah.
I would say, I like how you said that. I would add to that. It was when I can look and say I was becoming me.
Yeah.
Or I had this way to cope and manage, and it was, when you look back at the addiction, I can say that was a solution, and that was a solution that had a lot of consequences, and not, and I put solution in quotation marks.
Well, so recovery language would say the problem's not the problem.
Right.
The problem is the solution to another problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you were finding that.
So I had, so here you look back at this 12, 13-year-old who didn't, I remember the moment when I said, I am not going to be like my sister and cry. I'm not going to be a problem. And somewhere in my head, I knew, this isn't about me. This is about them. And I think that's right. But the problem is, while I knew they loved me, I didn't let them love me. Right? I didn't let them comfort me.
Yeah.
I just shut it all off. And I remember that was the moment.
So avoidant attachment.
Yeah. It was a way to just, to contain it and shut it off. And so then what helped me keep it contained? Well, dopamine from an addiction to pornography, and I think that is what then the solution becomes the problem, and the solution. So I can look back, so at this point in the story when I'm there after helping this guy in Westwood Village, I'm no longer using, the last time I acted out was in October of 1998. And in this story, I might be, I think maybe a year or two after
Sober?
that. Yeah. Yeah. Not acting out, kind of sober.
Okay. So you were dry.
Yes.
Okay.
And I was developing friendships and learning how to be real transparent in those friendships. And so I would say I had sobriety with pockets that still needed to be kind of cleaned out.
Dirty sobriety.
Dirty sobriety, yeah. But I was not acting out.
Yeah.
But I still think the work thing had not quite, that's still about to unfold in the story.
Did you do any kind of 12-step work?
I did not. No, I didn't. I did the work with the therapist.
Okay.
I love the 12 steps, and I'll refer clients to the 12 steps. For me, I did work with a therapist, and then that community that I was starting to grow and develop in were the people that I was really transparent with.
Yeah.
And
Which is a giant, like I tell clients all the time when I send them to 12 steps, the number one thing you get is community.
Yes.
And then every other thing you get that's the delivery vehicle that it comes in, is that community.
Yeah.
So like it's this place where you can learn how to have, or practice, I should say, healthy intimacy.
Yes.
And when you mess up, because it'll happen, like you're messing up with other people that are trying. They're committed to the same thing. And so you have that chance to circle back and repair, and you learn a different way of doing relationship. And it sounds like you were doing that anyway.
Right.
So you had like a piecemeal version of that, just not structured.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It was these guys where I could be completely open, and I for some reason for me I always, and even now to this day I don't like the word accountability, like accountability group. But I love the word transparency group. Can we like accountability? And again, this might just be semantics, but for me, accountability means this external person's going to hold me accountable to what my actions are, versus here's a person I can be transparent with.
Is that allergic reaction is there any kind of like church mix in that? Because I have the same thing. Like I'm not a big fan, but it's coming from, being in youth ministry so long and having accountability groups kind of drilled in. But then, being able to identify a pattern. Hey, we're going to meet at McDonald's at 6 a.m. once a week. The first week you show up, hey, I got this problem. Hey, I got this problem. The second week you show up, how'd you do? But you're tired and you don't really know anything about intimacy, so you don't want to talk about it. So you just go, I did okay. How did you do? Oh, I did okay. And then when the third week's coming up, you call in to go, hey, I can't do this morning. I was up late last night. And then before you know it, you're out.
Right.
Or if you do keep it up, you just show up and talk about the game or something. And I think unless you're taught what intimacy and vulnerability and that kind of stuff is, accountability becomes this, I don't know, social.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so since I wasn't part of the church really till 27, I don't necessarily have some of the same church stuff, but I see what you're saying. And I do think a lot of pockets of the church don't handle the issue of pornography and men's issues very well, because they're really focused on the symptom and not what's going on. And I do think the accountability groups, to me, by labeling it that, they're broken before they start, because we've already said now there's something external that's gonna, fix me and hold me. I've got this external kind of locus of control thing that what I'm gonna do, what I like what Nate Larkin says about it. Now I've got another place to show up and hide. Right?
Yeah, Nate's been on the show.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, I love Nate. But so this external, it's broken before it starts. But if I have a place where I can show up and say, let's not just look at the symptom, but let's look at what that symptom is trying to be a solution, to me for. And now I can talk about my loneliness. Now I can talk about my anxiety. Now I can talk about the things that the addiction and the dopamine was a solution for.
Almost using it as a signal that when you find those triggers or cravings show up, what was it that kind of set that
Yeah.
process in motion, and
Absolutely.
then let's work backwards.
That's absolutely true. I mean, so I'm over 2 decades out. Most of the time, it's not on my mind at all. But there's these times where it comes up.
I call it the default mode.
Yeah.
Because like you can do work and change, and when you're in your intentional mind, well, I would say sober mind, but no pun intended, kind of like you can do differently. But then there are times where autopilot will kick in, but with enough work, even then you can go, oh, there's that guy.
And it is, for me, it's like it's the check engine light that says I'm not taking care of myself. There's a part of me that I've been ignoring, and when I say it pops up, it's I'm nowhere, it's so far out of the shine, but it does pop up in terms of.
But you've learned how to
think
clock
about it. Yeah, and then I realize, okay, what's going on, and what's happening typically for me is there's some part where I feel lonely, or there's some part where I feel anxious, and when I can identify that, now I can go relationally and reach out. And loneliness and anxiety. And I think this is part of the danger of what addiction does is those negative feelings of loneliness and anxiety, like those are actually helpful. And if I'm numbing those don't tell me what I need.
I had a client the other day, he came in talking about noticing a knot in his stomach when he was doing a certain activity. So we kind of kept talking and identified it as fear. And then he said, now tell me how to get rid of it. And I was like, why would you want to get rid of it?
Right.
Like that gives you information.
It's helpful.
Because like A, you're going to get to the point where you can notice your fear outside of your stomach. But B, what if sometime you didn't notice it, but you noticed the knot? It's going to tell you something about yourself that then you have the chance to do something about. Like that is a really valuable knot.
Right.
So get rid of that.
Yeah. It's almost like he's saying, my hand hurts on this hot stove. So will you tell me how to like not feel that hurt? Like, no, listen to the hurt.
Yeah.
It'll help you save your hand.
Yeah. But for people divorced from their heart, like you and me, like you don't get that. You think, oh, that's something going wrong.
I got to get out of this feeling. Yeah, there's something wrong. It's too much. I got to do something to keep it stuff down.
So you had met this guy on the street, noticed that you wanted to help people.
Yes.
And Thank you for bringing us back. Where did you go from?
So I'm walking back. So now I've got I know I want to help people. Okay, that's good. I've got that. I've got a direction. And so it was either be a teacher. I've got some teachers in school, people in my family. I've got, or be an FBI agent because they really like white collar criminals, or they like going after white collar criminals, and they love CPAs, which is what I was, and I could do that and make society better.
I just love that on your list you went from teacher to FBI agent.
Yeah. And then it was a counselor, and but counselor was the longest.
This is the start of a joke. A teacher, an FBI agent, and a therapist walk into a bar.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. That would be good. Counselor was the one. I mean, those were the books I was reading. That was the thing that got me going. It was also the longest road because I didn't even have my undergrad was in business economics. I didn't even have the undergrad to get into the grad program, and so all the startup, and it was the longest road. So I thought, I'm going to be an FBI agent. I'm going to do that. And so I went and I did the test. So it's really competitive to get into the FBI. And
by the way, just a couple of weeks ago, I got a LinkedIn email with a thing on there that said the FBI in Tennessee was looking for therapists.
Really?
And I was like, Leanne, I'm going to apply to do this. And she was like, give me a break. You don't need it. It's like, no, it's going to be great. I'm going to be an FBI. And then I clicked on it and started reading, and it was like, you can't be older than, I think it said 37 or something. And I was like, oh.
They've got some restrictions.
Yeah. I'm an old man. I can't do it now.
Well, they've got age restrictions. They got some other, but I at the time I met all of it. I fell in, none of those restrictions applied to me. So I went and applied. I got in to do the written test, and I got past the written test. Then they do a background check, which is a real extensive. You got to fill out this whole form, and
I would imagine so. Yeah.
Yeah, and I must have got through that because then I got invited to do the interview face to face. It's like an interrogation.
Ooh.
And what's funny is, as I remember it, I can't remember now if there were 2 or 3, but they flew me out to Las Vegas, and they do it, they fly a bunch of people out to Vegas. And then you go and you go meet, and you're face to face, you're being interrogated, and they're asking you questions about stuff. And I made it through that, and I got basically a letter that said, you are in the FBI, conditional on passing the physical exam, which I was in the best shape of my life. That wasn't going to be a problem, and a polygraph test. I'm like, no problem. I can do that. And I'm like, all right, I'm getting ready to go to Quantico. Like, I'm kind of preparing for that for my life. And so I go to take the polygraph test. I don't know if you've ever been polygraphed before.
No, I mean, I have read a lot about it, listened to several podcasts, kind of like talks about it. So I mean, I know a little bit, but I've never even been near one in real life.
You go in, meet the polygrapher, you ask questions, and then for the FBI they have it's 15 questions, 5 questions it's 3 sections, right? So, are you a spy? Did you lie on your application? And do you meet the drug requirements? Meaning, you haven't used any heavy drugs more than 5 times, and that marijuana you haven't used more than 15 times. And so we go through. And I'm getting polygraphed, and at the end they give you the results, and I failed it. And I failed it on the question, have you used marijuana more than 15 times? And because as I'm preparing for it, I mean, I went to school, Santa Barbara, and my roommates used marijuana, and I didn't really always love it because I didn't like the way like it made my lungs feel, and I had maybe a few good experiences, but for the most part, it wasn't a good experience. And I was trying to remember how many times I think it's like 11 or 12. Like it's maybe something like that, but I'm not totally positive. I might be forgetting sometimes. Anyway, I failed. So I'm like, we've argued back and forth. I'm not lying. He's like, you're lying.
That's everything I've read about it. Not, it's not admissible in court anymore. It's not looked at as totally scientific, because if a person truly believes what they're saying, then the signs don't show up to detect it. Yeah. So you can't determine an objective truth.
I had a friend email me after, say, on the research she's done is it doesn't work on sociopaths or people that are really honest. And so I'm one of those. I guess. I'm one or the other.
Which one? We'll figure out.
Right. And but anyway, so we're back and forth. He's like, look, the guy's like, if you've done it once, you've done it more than 15. I'm like, that's not true for me. And anyway, back and forth. So I wrote a letter and I protested.
Was that Jeff Sessions that was doing it with you? Or?
That's funny. Yeah, I don't know. It was back and forth until finally I don't know what else to tell you. Yeah. And so I wrote a letter. I protested to Washington. I protested. I got another polygraph, and I failed it on the exact same question. And at the time, it was like, I can laugh now looking back, but at the time, it was devastating. Yeah. Because here's this big organization, and they're saying I don't have integrity, and what are people going to think? And not only that, I had like, I'm going to be an FBI agent like that. I started to kind of incorporate that into my identity. Yeah. And what I realized then, I think this is what I was referring to before about sobriety, I hadn't totally conquered the work side yet because I still had this external validation or this external thing, being an FBI agent, to take care of my own sense of self-worth and my own kind of sense of self. And it really revealed that in a very painful way. Because I remember having to go talk to people, and I sent out an email, big broadcast email to the whole community of people that knew what was going on, and I told them what happened, and it was very embarrassing, and worried what they're going to think about me, and but it really confronted, like, I know that I'm being honest as much as I can remember. I know that. And I just have to rely on that and rely on that God knows. And I can't, while I can care what other people think, I can't really let that be my compass, but I mean, it was a painful process to get there.
Yeah.
You know, it was I had some friends walking with me, and it touches me like it's a good kind of choked up, because Summer was part of that group. You know, we were just friends. We would do a homeless outreach together, and we were friends, and I still have the email. But because in the midst of this devastation, she had written an email. Don't worry, you know, just means better things are to come. You know, she was one of those things. Because I would have never. I mean, I would have gone away to Virginia. Mm-hmm. I would have not been sent back to LA, and we would have never, you know, continued. Yeah. We would have never gone past being friends.
Yeah.
And so I look back and I'm like, wow, okay. I see like God's love is very ruthless, very painful, and also very good.
One of my best friend, who was my best man at our wedding, he used to say he works a lot with addiction stuff as well. He's a therapist, and he would say, God doing for me what I couldn't or wouldn't do for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I could not. If I had not failed to get in by not passing a test or not passing an interview, it would have been me that failed, right? I would have not. It would have been something I just didn't, you know, I just didn't do well enough or whatever. But where it's this thing that's like doesn't make really any sense and is totally out of my control, it was really God closing a door, and then it revealed this part of me that I would not have known about. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe there would have been something else. I'm sure there would have. But it revealed this part, and then you look at it wasn't just a closed door, and I think that's, you know, even now talking about it, that's the part that just touches me of how we don't know like how the story is being written. We can feel. I mean, at the time I would have said loss. Mm-hmm. At the time I would have said, you know, shame, and then it turns into this resilience, and then it turns into this redemption. And then looking back, I can see like this email from Summer and it was a bunch of other people, but from Summer of how neither one of us knew where this was going to go, and what a great thing that was.
That's amazing. Yeah. I was telling somebody not too long ago, you know, I too was in Southern California. I was working at a church in San Diego. I got fired. That led me to move back to South Carolina. Mm-hmm. I got a job at my home church. They laid me off after a while. And because I just started therapy, I really wanted to continue therapy. And because insurance helped me pay for it, I was like, well, I need a job that has insurance benefits. So I ended up getting a job at Starbucks. Mm. And I met Leanne working at Starbucks. Mm. And I remember very clearly having this moment at Starbucks near the Frappuccinos, where I realized, you know, and this was probably 1.5 years, 2 years into my therapy as a client, realizing for the first time, oh man, I like who I am. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I'd ever thought that. And then thinking or praying to myself, you know, God, if I need to sling coffee for the rest of my life, but I get to feel like this, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, right. Yep.
But kind of like looking back and in the same way, you know, getting fired from my church in San Diego, getting laid off from my church in South Carolina, feeling like a failure, feeling shame, loneliness, sadness, like all of this, and just going, God, what in the world are you doing? Yeah. And looking back and going, if I wouldn't have gotten fired in San Diego, I'd have never moved back to South Carolina. Right. If I wouldn't have gotten laid off at that church, I'd have never worked at Starbucks. And if I'd have never worked at Starbucks, I would have never met Leanne. Yeah. None of my life would be the same. Yeah. And those times that I felt this level of pain that I thought I couldn't endure, were really scaffolding moments that were just building upon until I ended up where I ended up. Yeah. But it's impossible to see that in the moment. Right. You make those connections looking back. Yes. And I think unless you have relationships like what you were saying in the moment to just say, hold on. Mm-hmm. You know, hey, all of that stuff may be lost, but I'm here with you. Mm-hmm. You know, that gets you through until you have the strength to look back.
Yeah, That's right. I mean, in the middle of it, it was the relationships
Mm-hmm.
around me. It was I had a close friend, a couple close friends walking with me through it, kind of helping me. For me, it was again revealing this piece of, okay, where is my identity?
Mm-hmm.
I've just kind of got ripped away, and that process of finding it's not dependent on this outside stuff, and to
Mm-hmm.
be able to turn in, that was a big thing. And now that the FBI was off the table, then now counseling is back on. But boy, that was
a teacher.
well, a teacher. So I really liked the idea of being with the kids. What I didn't like was the process to get there.
Yeah.
And so that I decided not to do that. What I didn't want to do was land in another accounting job,
Mm-hmm.
another version of what accounting was, where it wasn't a good fit.
Uh-huh.
And so,
So you just recognized something in you was connecting and kind of guiding you towards
yeah,
counseling.
because in the midst of this, I'm in my own counseling too.
Yeah.
And in the midst of this, really connecting to myself and realizing, looking back, what I always loved about accounting was when I got to lead the junior accounting folks, and it was kind of a badge of honor that they would come to me first if they were going to be leaving, because we had a personal relationship, and that I cared about them as people.
You saw something and you lit up when it came to connecting with people.
Right. Yeah, connecting and shepherding,
Which is interesting for like a porn addict, because really that is something that it's an inability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's why you go towards the fantasy. So even kind of
escape,
coming alive to, and maybe that happened looking back, I don't know, but like coming alive to that, oh, I got lit up when I could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always loved that. Like that was that. Look back on the accounting, that part of my career, and it was always the relationships of the team. I mean, even looking at how I went from doing auditing into tax was more about kind of being part of a community, and staying put rather than changing every 2-3 weeks.
So are you still out in California?
Yes, I went to school. So I ended up at Fuller Theological Seminary. I did their master's program. In the midst of this, Summer and I, moving forward, and we ended up getting married, and then I turned in my last paper at Fuller on a Wednesday, and on Monday morning we're driving here out to Franklin, Tennessee.
Wow. Was Ramsey what brought you out this way?
No, I came out and I didn't know anything about, here I am, a new career, a new state. I'm calling around trying to get jobs. And in California, once you graduate with your master's, you're an intern. So I'm calling around saying, I'm an intern, not knowing out here that means something different. Can I, and I wasn't getting any jobs. And I then did get hired at Ramsey's and worked there, and then put the counseling practice on hold.
So what was it about Nashville that brought you guys?
Summers got her sister and brother-in-law are out here, and then
cool.
Mom and stepdad.
Nice.
So yeah, we knew. So in California at the time, our friends who lived in Burbank, that's where we were lived in Burbank, and Burbank has the millionaire homes, and then it's got the North Hollywood gangs on one side of it, and in the middle we had some friends who had an 888 square foot home, and I think they sold it for $540,000. This is in, I think, 2004, somewhere in there. And we're like, we're never going to be able to,
I always told people when I lived out there, you got to come cash in your chips out there and come this way. It doesn't work going the other way, but it works really well coming this way.
No, we had no perspective when we moved out here. We're like, wow, Franklin seems cheap. It's like compared to what Southern California was. No perspective at all.
Oh yeah, I had a buddy that when he got married in I think same year, 2004, he and his wife bought a 2-bedroom condo next to the church. So South Orange County, Lake Forest. I think he paid $330 for a 2-bedroom condo that was probably 900 square feet.
It's crazy.
1,000 square feet, something like that.
Yeah.
I had another buddy who sold his 2-bedroom condo around that same time for something like that in the threes, but he had bought it back in like 98, 99 for like 90 something.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, dude,
the bubble,
equity, holy cow.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, the bubble, it just went pretty
you get 4 years
fast.
down the road from there and you're not selling anything.
Right. Yeah. Then things
Yeah.
it tanked. But one of the things. So I did go. One of the things I loved about working for Ramsey, and it was really the first job I left that I still liked. But what I missed was, while I loved the mission, is the idea of helping people. I like the kind of face to face. I like getting dirty. I like getting in at ground level with people, and I missed that. And so I started off trying to do a practice. Then I put that on hold, and then at some point I had to go back, and that's where I really focused on building a practice and was doing part-time practice, trying to build it while I worked full-time with Ramsey, and then it just got too busy. I couldn't, I was at this point where it's too busy to do both, but not busy enough to survive on just my practice. And Summer was pregnant with our second. And, that was a scary kind of jumping point.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad I did.
Yeah. Strangely enough, I got to say this. I recorded with Terry a couple of days ago, and I got to tell her thank you for something, and I'll tell you thank you for something now. When we got together for coffee, you were telling me kind of that journey of, starting out with Ramsey and the practice, and then kind of slowly taking a day from Ramsey, giving it to the practice. And pre that coffee, I was like, all right, I got to jump out of retail to do this. And after that, I went back to Leanne, and I was like, well, Rob was saying that he really did this way, so I think I'm going to try to talk to my bosses and see. And I graduated, or I finished in December of 17, graduated in May because of the ceremony, whatever. But I held on to that job for another year and a half. I didn't exit it till May of 19, and started one day of the practice.
Right.
And then took another day from that job and added to the practice. So did 2, and slowly just kind of made that transition out. And it, hearing your perspective and how you started brought a different kind of wisdom to where it allowed Leanne and I to really kind of look at it and go, what would we need the practice to be producing in order to kind of step away and survive? So we ran those numbers, and we were like, all right, we need, I don't know how many it was, maybe 8 clients that are regular before because we were also thinking benefits. And
you got to think about that stuff.
That kind of stuff. And I think, pre-coffee, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just thinking, because at one point Terry had thrown out that she, with Chris working, she could make it on 4 regular clients. And so I just had that number stuck in my head.
Sure.
Never thinking benefits, never thinking anything else.
Yeah.
But coffee with you, I was like, all right. So, and I just thought about a different way.
Okay.
So I held on to that job, that part-time job, much longer than I had originally thought. But even just the other night, we were walking the dog, and I was saying to Leanne, I'm so thankful for the way that I exited, because, looking back, I think it just set us up, so much better. And I think that by doing that, it gave me discipline, it gave me, wisdom, and I got so much from that job that, strangely enough, feeds into the practice.
Yeah, yeah.
So, thank you so much for even just being willing to hang out that time and just dispense your wisdom, because it really, really did have such an effect on even just being able to have the practice I do today.
I really appreciate you telling me that. That means something. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, that it is. These are the things, again, we don't take a class on this when we're getting our counseling degree of okay, now practically, how do you get out? What do you do? What's the way to do it? This is where I can look back on some of my business experience and my accounting experience, and certainly when I worked for Ramsey, that the benefit of that.
Strangely enough, I don't think I knew about your accounting background when we went to coffee until we sat down. And I was like, this is really great. Holy cow. This will come in handy.
Right.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So you are an EFT therapist, emotionally focused therapist.
Right.
Does the majority of your practice concentrate on couples?
I have about 75% couples.
How did you kind of lean into that? Because they teach us all kinds of stuff in school.
Yeah.
But you kind of as an individual kind of go, all right, this is the way I want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, so the way Fuller did it was they would give you a smattering of just about every kind of way to do it, every type of counseling, and then you'll figure it out once you leave. But for me, I think part of my story is, with my parents divorcing and then my own divorce, it's the destruction of what divorce is, for one, but then also what a relationship could be.
Mm-hmm.
And it just is a lot of meaning for me, especially when there's kids involved.
Mm-hmm.
If the couple has kids, and what that could mean for the legacy if they not only are stable, right? I want more than just the marriage to survive. I actually want it to thrive, and that I just get a lot of meaning out of that. And I think part of that, and I wonder sometimes if all of us therapists are just kind of working out our own stories.
You wonder that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, so here's the meaning of being able to go back, and I can look and say, this is who I was in 1998. And, or this is maybe how the path would have been different. And it's weird looking back and say it would have been different, because I would not change anything if it meant I'd be different now.
Yeah.
At the same time, I have regrets of things I did.
Well, I think that's an interesting kind of thought, because I have the same stuff, and it's not, I always kind of look at it as I'm really glad for the way things turned out, because I love who I am and where I'm at in my life today. If I had the chance to choose differently, I may have chosen differently, but, I think about the part in Avengers Endgame when they finally, Tony nails down time travel, but he's telling Cap and everybody else, but we don't change anything about the past 5 years, because he got married to Pepper and he has his daughter, and he's like, nothing there changes. Right. So we go back and we change this other stuff, but not at the expense of this. And it's that same kind of thing. Like, I think it is when you learn your story well enough and you integrate it, you recognize, oh, I have some sadness and some shame about some of the things that went on, but that doesn't mean that I don't like where I'm at.
Right.
And to a certain degree, as much as you can process it and integrate it, there are times where you're going to encounter those moments in your story and still feel, because they were powerful, and at the time they really hurt.
Yeah.
And I know that, like, for me, the last time I was in Southern California was, I think, 2014. And I was even telling Leanne the other week, like, there's certain landmarks that I would pass, and it would remind me of some things. And I would just feel this sadness, because I was almost like being transported back to who I was at those moments, and the loneliness that I felt, and kind of the unsureness and those kinds of things, and the inability I had to connect with people. And it just kind of viscerally brought it back. But I love where I'm at now.
Right.
But I still have those parts of me.
Yeah.
And I think that's normal.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I don't want to forget that stuff. Sometimes remembering it and feeling those things help me today.
Well, I was going to say that it's so valuable, isn't it, for our clients to be able to go, and it gives so much more empathy and so much more grace to when I can look back and see myself. I have regret. I don't feel shame necessarily. What I see is a hurt boy trying not to hurt. Who doesn't want to hurt? That's okay to not want to hurt.
Yeah.
And so I can look back and see these kind of ways I tried not to hurt. But then I can also see my clients that way. That, we're just trying not to hurt.
Yeah, I think it's almost, I don't want to say it's a cliche in what we do, but I know that some of us say it a lot, kind of the whole everybody makes sense in the context of their own story. I've kind of been conceptualizing it lately as every behavior has a payoff. Like, that nobody does things for no reason. They may not know the reason why they're doing it, and the reason may be terrible, but everybody does it for a reason. Yeah. So, what's the payoff that you're getting from something, and is that payoff, like, actually fulfilling? Is it actually hitting you where you need to, like, get hit?
Yeah.
Or is it just a placebo? Is it just a kind of like junk foody kind of like I'm filled up, but I'm not sustained or healthy kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I think that, to be able to look back at pockets of the story and go, I understand why I was making I would choose differently today, but I know why I was doing that. And I'm really thankful that, I've moved past that. That's that integration. I think that, and I think that, I don't know, this is not an empirically true statement, but I think that therapists that were in therapy and worked through a bunch of stuff before they came to it have a little bit of a leg up, at least when they're in school they do, because you have been transformed.
Right.
So you kind of have seen behind the curtain a little,
right.
Versus people that are just coming in that are already like well balanced and like nerds, weirdos.
That's right. Boy, I'm jealous of those people.
I know, right? Yeah. So let's talk about a movie.
Okay.
What movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
I brought Red 2.
Red 2. Sweet.
Sorry for the violence.
I'm not sorry at all. It was great. I got up at 5:00 and watched it this morning.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah. I when I say this, I wish I would have watched the first one first. Not because like I feel like this movie was lesser for it, but I liked this movie. So like, now I want to go back and watch the first one.
You know what? I was so self-conscious because I saw the other movies that therapists had brought in, and they're all so deep, and this really wasn't that kind of movie. So
but I think, you know what, though? The reason why I ask guests to pick it is because I trust that they're going to pick something that connects with them. And I think that makes for a better conversation because it means that, like, it's moved you or it communicates something about what you do.
Yeah.
So what was it about the movie that made you want to pick it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So first of all, the genre of the type of movie, for me, I needed, I just went through 2 days of trauma training. One of the things I love about EFT is it allows me to just be with clients. And so, I've been crying with clients as they cry and I'm moved. I mean, so when I'm picking my entertainment, sometimes I just want something real simple. I want to know that there's bad guys and that there's good guys. And I know at the end, the good guys are going to win. And there's going to be some explosions and some car chases in between that. And so part of this was part of my self-care of just taking a break and a movie that is, in some ways very simple. But the reason I chose this specific one is the line, I think it might be John Malkovich and his second to last line where he says, he made the run to emotional safety. But anyway, so the run to emotional safety, that kind of idea of what love is, this is really foundational. This idea of actually, and what attachment says about love is it's about safety. It's about emotional safety, that bond, that safe haven, that secure base. This is about emotional safety. There's lots of other ideas we have about love, things like it's a rational exchange of benefits, or it's about finding your soulmate, or, it's even more about a decision than a feeling, or it's some kind of fever, or it's just a kind of mystery.
Which I feel like a lot of that is based on people's metaphors to describe it. Like I don't think that anybody that says I am falling in love would unpack that enough to say I accidentally, without wanting to, developed a secure attachment that, with a person because I stumbled into them. I don't think anybody would unpack it that way, but those ideas do become a part of our kind of collective hive mind, so to speak, a lot of which is because they're perpetrated in movies and stuff. You know? We get these romantic kind of fantasy kind of things.
Yeah, or then then when that even goes into now, how do we as researchers or therapists, or how do we help people, because the other one I didn't mention was sexual selection theory, which is this idea that it's about getting us to procreate. And think the danger becomes if we have this idea that it's this other thing, how are we asking the questions? How are we leading people? How are we seeing and developing what the problem is if we're going to help them get to a place where we can help them?
Yeah.
And that when we start from attachment theory, which is what that emotional safety is, you start with that, and then now I know what questions to ask. Right now I know how I don't need to pathologize if somebody gets real big and angry or if they shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's not safe, well, that's actually pretty adaptive to have your fight or flight take over. Like, that's how we're wired.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like that is actually like you and I right now, like you have a great office, by the way.
Thank you.
It's a great office. I feel really relaxed and safe. And yet if we took this same setting but we put it in a bad part of Nashville in the middle of the night, it would be really hard for us to just stay here focused on each other, and because it's just not a safe environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that when we can look at, okay, if I know this is about emotional safety and the relationship doesn't feel safe, well, of course you're going to shut down, or you're going to get, really big and protesting.
Which I feel like a lot of what I do with clients is kind of identifying some of these ways that their cycles are happening and almost like normalizing it. Like, yeah, that it makes a lot of sense that if the story you're telling yourself is this, that you would react that way.
Right. Yeah.
And it's
really
not a way of saying like, hey, that behavior is A-okay, perfectly productive, but it's more like, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. And then kind of taken to the place of, now let's talk about that message. Is that, and I almost kind of think, really pragmatically of like, is that message working for you? Like, let's take a look at where it came from. And is it serving you the way that you wanna be served?
Yeah, it ultimately the answer would be no, wouldn't it? Like, yet in that moment, there's one of the steps of EFT, I should say, stage, is helping to de-escalate the negative cycle, and part of that is then understanding, okay, where's this coming from? Where are these behaviors coming from? And with a client where one that shuts down and pulls away, and that we identify right before they shut down, they actually see their partner displeased and feel like a failure. And then we see how, well, shutting down and getting away helps the intensity of that failure feeling dissipate. Now we can actually see it's actually helpful, not, I put that in quotation marks, but it's actually helpful as a way to cope with your shame. You're not getting away from your partner. You're actually trying to get away from the shame.
That's their payoff.
Yes,
yeah, they get a relief from the shame.
Yeah.
And when you identify it that way, you're like, I get it.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that when they can then communicate that to their partner, which is an EFT, that's where the power is that corrective attachment experience. They can, and what's so fascinating to me, which one of the things I really love about this model is they'll be looking at me fine. And then when they look at each other, what you saw when I talked about Summer.
Oh yeah.
It's like, that's what happens.
And I think it's when we as the therapist align and join and all that, those moments where, because there's sometimes during sessions where they will not make eye contact. There, you could build a brick wall right between them.
Yeah.
And I think that the classic textbook example of an EFT enactment is going to be, one of the partners saying to the therapist, I just wish I could tell him da 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 da. And then the therapist just going, would you like to say that to them now? Can you turn to them?
Sure.
And you see this, like, you see their eyeballs fighting, like they don't want to, not don't want to, but like they're having trouble realizing.
And sometimes they'll say, I can't do that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. And so I think that, there's times where it's made me like tear up in session because you see that kind of connection happening.
Oh, it's such a sacred moment when now they're changing and they're taking the shame. And so in this case, the person who's withdrawing with shame, and instead of pulling away, they're actually going toward. And this moment of where they're connecting to themselves, then they're letting their partner in, and their partner is now getting a new experience of the shame. Instead of the partner pulling away and being unavailable, they're present.
And it's so brave because typically the person who withdraws, they do that for a reason, and they've done that for a long time.
Yeah.
And so for them to, in the moment, choose, I'm going to risk.
Yeah.
I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to take my vulnerability in my heart to my partner.
Yeah.
And the payoff of that is intimacy. Like it increases that intimacy, but it is a risk, which I think is inherent in any relationship.
I don't think you can have vulnerability without risk.
Right.
And you definitely can't have intimacy without vulnerability. And, so absolutely I agree. And it what's, again, the balance of EFT too is I can then turn also to the partner who tends to get angry and critical and demanding. And I ask them what happens right before you get that. And then eventually they identify to something like, I feel unimportant, or I feel invisible, or I feel alone. And we can kind of identify that feeling it's a feeling of being small, isn't it? It's different than, what's the feeling of being angry? That's a really different feeling. And then we can explore, how does the anger help you with that lonely, invisible, insignificant feeling? And then they're connecting their own moves. They're
payoffs.
Yes. So they'll say something like, I had one client say, I feel bigger when I'm angry. Or what hurts is that I care, that I don't matter to them. But when I'm angry, I don't care, that I don't matter. I don't need them when I'm angry. I can take care of myself. Like, okay, that sounds, can you tell them about
what we
that?
were talking about before, the Murray method, that's the survivor.
Yes.
That's
right.
It gives me the ability to not care.
Yes.
Or to not be affected, like, kind of.
Yeah, it's like it's really, can see how adaptive it is and how helpful it is when we just talk about this moment when you're completely alone, and even though you're not alone in the room, but the feeling of being alone, you either are going to get control or you're going to try to contain it. Comfort's not available because that comes from outside, but control or contain. So here's this way to control and get bigger, and then when they can tie their own, the light bulbs start going off for them, but then they turn to their partner, and then they let their partner into that, and their partner gets to experience them with the loneliness, but not with the anger. And now we've started to change, the dance, and it's just remarkable to watch.
Yeah. It's this, the individual connecting with their true self and allowing their partner to see the true self, to have that connection happen.
Yeah.
And when two true selves finally really connect, it creates something different.
Yes.
Because I think that, when you're, like I used to say when I was in my divorced from my heart stage, like I was working in churches, like the messages I was telling myself was, I need to be perfect. The longer that I'm a quote unquote Christian, the more perfect I should be. So I used to conceptualize that as I was learning. I already had a mask on, but I had to learn to polish the mask. I had to keep making it shinier and shinier. And I think that in relationships, it's a similar thing. It's you learn to put on to protect yourself. And so then in those moments where you take the mask off and you reveal the true self and you see, and this is why it's so beautiful when it happens in session, but you see your partner not reject the true self.
Right.
It's this like, oh my gosh, like I don't have to put that mask back on.
Yeah.
Like, and that's that shame message of like, well, if they really knew, they would abandon me.
Right. They think less of me, they'd abandon me. And you see them even move toward this. It's something I'll always highlight, like, because it's great to have our partner come toward us and be happy with us if we do something nice for them, bring flowers or take care of the dishwasher, whatever. That's nice and that's good, and we want to do that stuff. But it's a whole other level if I bring my partner to me with who I am, and that there's action in that, but it's not the action of performance. It's an action of revealing, and I'm revealing who I am, and that's drawing my partner in like that. That's so powerful.
Yeah. Was there any ways that I pulled up IMDb's page on the movie because I'm so terrible at character names that I can't I can't ever remember them. Yeah. But like, were there any ways that, you know, the main character in the movie, Bruce Willis, Frank, that you saw like between him and Sarah, you know, any kind of bids for connection or any displays of like vulnerability or intimacy or...
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I love how the movie starts, you know, with them in Costco, and it's like total suburbia, total...
she's walking around with a big old bag of, I think it's like caramel corn or something that she's just eating. And that's a weekend. Right
and he's running around like in a barbecue and stuff. And what I think is so awesome about that illustration is here they weren't arguing. There wasn't conflict. And yet you also wouldn't say she felt close to him. Mm-hmm. And I think that is also part of this. Like, we cannot feel close to the goal is closeness and connection, and that lack of conflict isn't the same as closeness. And here is
that feels important. The lack of conflict is not the same as closeness.
Right. Yeah. That's what that here there. We're not really in open argument. We're not really going at each other, and yet also, I don't feel like I can turn to you and be open to you and rely on you and know that you're going to be there when I need you and know that you are happy with who I am.
Part of me even feels the opposite is true. Like, you would need some conflict. Like, I've had clients come in because of distress in their relationship, and they'll say, we've never had a fight. We've never had a disagreement. And my response is always, well, why do we need both of you then?
Yeah.
Like, if you've never disagreed about anything, then somebody's holding back.
How is that working? Because this is, I mean, I think that's a really great point that you're bringing up, because I consider myself, so my family of origin, we don't do direct conflict. And so I consider myself a recovering conflict avoider. So my tendency is that. And yet what I've realized the longer Summer and I have been married and the longer that I've done this kind of work is that closeness, intimacy, it doesn't happen in spite of conflict. It happens because of it. But it's not conflict that's us going at each other where there's a winner and a loser, there's a good guy and a bad guy, there's somebody right, somebody wrong. It's not that kind of conflict.
Which is one of the EFT demon dialogue, kind of find the bad guy.
Yes. Yeah. That would be what EFT lingo would be, like the negative cycle, right? We're not doing that, but in the positive cycle, there is conflict, but it's conflict that's more on the other side of it. I understand you a little more and you understand me a little more, and that we have this sense of connection and confidence now that because, you know, we can have this thing between us and we basically say, none of us, we like being close better than we like this. So let's figure this out together so we can be close again.
Yeah.
And if we really are truly like, you know, two becoming one, how are we not going to bump into each other and step on each other's toes?
Yeah.
And, you know,
we're coming from two different families, two different stories. If we're really bringing our true selves, like there's gonna be, my joke is always like, free will was a great idea that God had. He messed up when he gave it to everybody else but me.
Right,
like if he would have only given it to me, it'd have been great. But then everybody else got it too.
Yeah. I love it.
So, you know, and I've got a better idea than they do. But but yeah, if you're bringing your true self, like you're going to naturally have, like even, I mean, the simplest example, when we got our first Christmas tree, we both had all these Christmas traditions. And of course, you get to the top and you go, are we a star family or are we an angel family?
Yeah, okay.
And it turns out Leanne's family were an angel family and we were a star family. And so it's just like, well, what do you want? Well, I want an angel. What do you want? I want a star. And then it, you know, and for a while we were just like, oh, I want this and I want that. And you just kind of have to go, all right, well, what do we do? Like, let's figure it out.
You got to negotiate that.
Yeah.
Well, and that's even research shows. I think John Gottman talks about research, how it is 69%. So I think 7 out of 10 roughly of the things couples argue about. It's not about right or wrong, right? It's about what should go on top of the tree. Or I think Summer shared, well, we have a stocking story like that. We're doing stockings our first Christmas, and her family wrapped them all, and my family did it the right way.
You know what's funny is in that I was like, oh yeah, we did it like he did. Like, so I came down on your side in that story.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and, but I mean, again, and it's just these are differences. It's not
Mhm.
right or wrong. We got to learn to navigate that if we really truly are showing up. And really the only way to get closeness is to show up. And I know there's some parts, and some people have got the message. So in like 12 steps, for instance, that you don't need to tell some of the stuff to your spouse. And I agree about like, if it's temptation stuff, but if it's something that's crossed a boundary, I actually think the person who crossed the boundary needs to know their spouse knows this. Otherwise, they're going to be wondering if every time their spouse says, I love you, they're going to be wondering, yeah, but would you love me if you knew this?
Mm-hmm.
We've got to be able to be
Well, I think
open.
in that particular specific case, to me, it's always a matter of, and Bethesda does a great job of modeling this. Why do you want to tell?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to tell because it will bring you closer together ultimately? That means you need to process the story yourself and know what happened, why did it happen, what are you going to do different next time, versus I can't hold this guilt and shame in and I just need to vomit it up to get it off my chest.
Sure.
That's a selfish reason to disclose.
Sure. Yeah, there's more work to do around
which will
that.
ultimately damage the relationship because it's more about getting rid of your own tension and anxiety than about the other.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right, yes, but it's also like, let's work around that.
Yeah, we got to be ready. We got to do some work around.
Yeah, because I remember like my therapist said at one point, typically a spouse cares more about what you're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again than about what actually happened. And that's not to say you don't tell them what actually happened, but like that's to say like that's a sign of process. That's a sign of I have understood what has happened.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'll ask a lot of times when there's been something discovered, and I'll ask a client, I know these are both really hard. What's harder for you? Is it harder that they did this thing that went outside the boundaries of the marriage? Or is it harder that it was kept a secret for this amount of time? And they'll often say the secret.
Yeah.
That if they had let me in when it happened, I would have felt like we were doing this together, that we were actually a team and the addiction is on the outside and it's the two of us together.
Oh, externalizing the issue.
Yeah.
And it's that, what we were talking about with the enactment, it's that seeing the true self and moving closer.
Yeah.
But feeling like they got shut outside the door.
Right.
It's another layer of disconnection.
Yeah. There's like the injury and then there's the injury after the injury.
Yeah.
It's we just have to be careful with that. But everybody's individual, so I wouldn't say that everybody says that. But I would actually, my experience has been the majority will say it's the secret that was.
Do you see any correlation between maybe one type of partner saying it over the other? I almost said one gender, but I also want to recognize that there's like same-sex couples and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, is there, typically one will think that more than the other, or?
Well, so like in the EFT language, like the pursuer tends to be the one who wants to not be kept out. They're the ones who tend to have more of that being left out raw spot. And so I haven't really thought about that, but if I were going to guess, I would say it was probably.
That makes sense. Yeah. Because, a withdrawer, based upon, even the name, like they are more apt to, step back, to hide. Not hide. In their mind, it would be protecting.
Yeah.
Covering up.
Kind of letting things blow over a bit.
Yeah, I with my clients, I'll talk about, slip or relapse plans, and it's typically 4 steps. It's like, if that occurs, first thing you do is make a phone call to somebody in your 12-step group. Second thing you do is make it to the very next meeting and you talk about it. Third thing you do is you reach out to either your sponsor or your therapist, depending upon where you're on the program. The last thing you do is tell your spouse and or partner, and the last part is there because you've had these 3 layers of processing before it.
Sure.
And then they're hearing that going, oh, I got all this time, great. And then I hit them with, and by the way, that all occurs in 48 hours.
Right. You got to get on it.
Like, you're not.
Yeah.
This
you're
is not
you're
an
limiting
excuse.
that window too of where the spouse would say, why did it take this long?
Yeah.
But to be able to say, I did these other 3 steps.
Yeah. And this is not an excuse to hide or to stretch it out.
But I think that's wise too, because it allows the person to have some resources. It might not go so well with the
Mm-hmm.
spouse.
And you tell your spouse or partner what the SLIP plan is.
Mhm.
So they know if you're telling them what has happened, that you've
Mhm.
gone through
Yeah.
these things, and that there may have been 48 hours, but it was 48 hours max,
Yeah, that's really good.
you know?
I've noticed, one of the things I've noticed too, whenever we've gone back and debriefed with any addict that I've ever worked with, is the relapse happened, but I can't think of an exception where before the relapse there was a period of isolation. Not necessarily like they were physically alone, but they started keeping secrets and they
Mhm.
started not letting people in.
Mhm.
And again, it kind of goes back to these ways we can feel alone in a crowded room, and that the ways that we can, this emotional safety again is like, it might be there, but if you're not relying on it, if you're not trusting it or giving yourself a chance to experience it, it doesn't matter if it's there or not.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier about the default mode.
Mhm.
Because like you could have been in therapy for years, recovery for years, sober for years. You get into that default mode, that unintentional living again,
Mhm.
and you go, oh, well, this worked for me, quote unquote, worked for me
Mhm.
before. Or you go, well, I'll give myself a pass this once. But there's all kind of cliche sayings in recovery of like, you're only as healthy as your secrets.
Right.
And, you know, shame grows in the dark, you know? And so when you start to hold stuff back, then that shame starts to sprout,
There's
and it kind of begets more and more and more. And shame's MO is isolation. So it's
Yeah.
going to tell you they wouldn't understand.
Right.
They would reject you if they knew. Nobody else could ever know what this is like.
Yeah.
And it just isolates you.
Absolutely. I think it's shame or rejection and then abandonment are the two kind of sides of loneliness. I think they're both different ways to feel lonely, but there's that it's and in that loneliness, which is one of the things I love about attachment theory, is it's all, there's a lot of science behind it, which I love. I love the empirical side. That's my accountant side, analytical side. I love it. And it's got this process. And yet it also, in scripture, when God says it's not good for man to be alone, basically attachment theory explains that, this idea, of what that really means and what it means to be alone, that we could be alone in a crowded room, but how we're just not, that's not good for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's that you used the words, surviving versus thriving. We were talking about relationships, and it's like, is it okay? Is it good enough for you to just stay alive, or do you want, you mentioned scripture like John 10:10. Do you want that abundant, overflowing, full life? Do you want all that life could be? And it's, I get a lot of guys in here who are really heady, and the heart's turned off, and they think, well, is the end result of this supposed to be I turn my brain off for my heart to come on?
Right.
And I'm like, no, it's not one of these works at 100% and the other one doesn't.
Right.
And it's not even a one works at 50 and the other works at 50. We got to switch both of those on 100%.
Yeah, there's information.
Because that's
in
the
both.
fullness of the human experience.
Yes.
Like, your feelings are there for a reason. You have a brain for a reason.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to keep one turned off, if you go all the way brain, you're cold. You're not human. You're,
right.
It's purely utilitarian in the way you live. And if you go all the way heart, you're impulsive.
Right.
You're reactionary. You don't think. You just go with whatever it is you feel in the moment, and they balance each other out and they work together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great way to say it.
Yeah. Tell me something that you have learned from your clients.
I mean, there's so much. What I think about, though, right now when you say that, and you had touched on it a little bit earlier, what I actually get really inspired by my clients to see the courage to go into some of their past and to go into the hard parts of their present, and then to the way that they risk. And again, being a recovering conflict avoider, I see that, and it calls me to account. And I think, if I'm asking my clients to do this, I better be doing this in my own life. And because taking this risk, my son Adam, who He's a prankster. We got him this gum that is fake gum. You can pull it out and you get a shock if you pull out the piece of gum.
Yeah.
Have you seen
Yeah.
it?
Uh-huh.
And he said to me one night, he's like, Daddy, he's like, I dare you to pull that out. And because we bought it for him, we know the prank. And I said, all right, I'll do it if you do it. And he's like, okay, let's do it. So I'm doing that now. In my head, I know like this is not going to cause permanent damage. It's going to be a brief moment, and yet here I am, like I'm like doing it halfway. It's not getting me. Finally, on like the 10th time, I finally just pulled it. But even though I knew I was going to get through it, even though I knew the pain was going to be not, serious, no serious consequences to it, I still didn't want to go through that.
There's something
moment.
deep down.
Yes.
Yeah.
That to me is what conflict's like. And that even that momentary separation. And so when I see my clients do it though, and I see them honestly go down in this place where there's chaos, I can remember having to go talk to Summer about something. I didn't know how it was going to go. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, I know I need to do this. Like, and my counselor, being counselor Rob to myself, like, you got to do this. This is important. It'll probably go well. Summer is great. For us, it's not always such a straight road like it is in the books. Sometimes, we often tank and then we get better, which is that tanking is like the painful part. But I remember the feeling that I had in my body was the same feeling I had before skydiving. And I remember that feeling of, you're sitting at the door and the plane works fine and you got to jump out.
Yeah.
And you don't get to choose whether they push you out. But I do remember, because you're tandem, right? So you just go.
Oh, gosh.
But it was the same feeling. And so that to see my clients do that and take that jump and take that risk, it inspires me.
Well, I mean, I think that it makes sense if the message that you were telling yourself was conflict equals separation. Then that makes a lot of sense that all of those things would be happening in you.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really tough to have this job and not be inspired by your clients.
That's right.
I think if you're not connecting with them. Right. You're not really there.
Right.
Tell me something that you do to take care of yourself.
For me, so I've really found like I just need to exercise. I'm an introvert. I call myself a social introvert because I really love relationship and people. I love what I do, but I also need to get some time.
You got a certain amount of energy to spend.
Yeah.
So you want to be intentional about who you spend it on. Yeah,
that's
same
right.
way. Yeah.
That's right. And so one of the things that hits kind of all the spots is if I can put my headphones on, it's a sunny day, and I can get my running shoes off on my own and just go run. And that I've really found if I don't keep that up, if I'm not doing some kind of body movement, then it just kind of wears on me, and I start to feel it in my back, and I start to just feel it in my mood. And so for me, it in terms of outside the practice, there's some things I do inside the practice too, but in terms of outside the practice, then that's probably that's one of the key things.
But we are our practice. So like if you're not doing the stuff outside, then it is going to affect inside.
It does. Oh, it definitely affects how I can be with clients. It's interesting. I had an experience this week though, where I showed up and I was exhausted. I didn't sleep very well. We're having our problems we talked about with the dog, and I was really tired. And then had this amazing session. And at the end of it, I was crying with the clients and they were crying. We were all crying in the room. And the exhaustion vanished. I was not tired anymore. So there's some about that gets me going. But you're right. If I'm not taking care of myself, I can't be present for clients.
So let's say that somebody was listening to our conversation today and they feel like they could connect with you and they would love to see you as a client. How can they get a hold of you? Yeah.
So probably the website would be the best way. There's a contact form on there. People.
What's the website?
It's hopetreecounseling.com. And so that would be where we would list anything that's going on. I'm about to, when my son was about 3, I was getting him in his car seat and he didn't like being in the car seat and he was crying. He's like, I said, sorry, buddy, you got to get in. It's safe. This makes it safe. And he said, it's not safe to be comfortable. I thought, wow, that's really profound.
And you were like, hold on, let me write that down.
Yeah. And so what I found is like now when I start to feel like I got this in, which is where I've been in my practice, where it kind of just, it's been doing it for over a decade now. It kind of runs itself, and kind of liked the idea of turning the light on, seeing clients, turning the light off, going home. But now I'm ready to start reaching out. So we're going to start doing supervision and doing some other things to just
Very cool.
change it up a bit and
Yeah.
stretch a little bit.
Awesome. So
yeah.
hopetreecounseling.com.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Rob, thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
It has been just the greatest time to get to sit with you and hear your story and how this movie kind of brings stuff out that you like to talk about.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Hey, everybody. You know, I have said for as long as I've done the show that one of the main reasons why I do it is to make an effort towards breaking down the stigmas that surround mental health, counseling, therapy, therapists, counselors, all of the above. And that's part of the reason why I have selected the questions that I have that I use to ask my guest every week on the show. You know, I ask, why therapy? I ask, tell me something that you've learned from your clients. I ask, what do you do to take care of yourself? Out of an effort to help people connect with the truth that therapists are people too. Just like I say about characters in movies or about myself or whomever, you know, therapists also have a bad case of being a person. And I'm so absolutely over the moon that I had the chance to sit down with Rob and interview him. He's a guest that I had wanted since launching the show, and it just took a while for the schedules to sync up. And, you know, wanting him to be on was, you know, certainly because I knew, you know, his where his expertise and specialties lie. I knew that sitting across the table from him at coffee, you know, how much he knew, how smart he was, that he was caring because he took the time to do that. But on top of those things, after having him on, I can't think of anybody who exemplified exactly what I'm going after with this show better than him. Here you have somebody who is a therapist because through the transformation that they went through in the middle of their own story, they received something and they want to now spend their life giving that to others. It is the most beautiful thing. And I'm just so grateful that, you know, Rob came on and trusted me in the office enough to tell me that story, and then trusted me enough to share it with all of you. And it's my, you know, deepest hope, and I'm pretty sure this will happen, that you got something out of that, because I know I did. I want to pivot just a little bit and talk about something that has happened this past couple days. So, of course, you know, we say at the beginning of every show, Therapist Theater is located in, it emanates from, it's broadcast from Nashville, Tennessee. Leanne and I live up here. My practice is up here. This is home. And I'm sure maybe, you know, if you follow the news, you heard about early on Tuesday morning, a tornado came through Nashville and was quite destructive. And many people have been affected. I know that the population that the agency that Leanne works for even serves a family who lost everything. Their house was destroyed, all of the contents of it destroyed. They have their health, but you know, as far as I know, 22 people weren't as lucky. 22 people lost their lives in that. And so right now, our city is hurting. Our city is trying to come together and literally pick up the pieces. And so what I want to do is ask you, if you have seen the news, if you have read something and you have felt moved to help, if you have felt moved to contribute something. Early this morning, I asked Leanne if there were certain places that I could direct you to do that. She mentioned that there was a place called the Community Foundation that you can go to donate. And I will have a link to that website in the show notes. But the Community Foundation and their emergency response fund is a great place to go to financially contribute if you'd like to help Nashville try to help its own. And I've just seen so much circulating around in the past day or two about, how do you deal with something like this, with an act of nature. I think that sometimes when we're dealing with trauma in relationship, when we're dealing with hurt, when we're dealing with conflict, part of dealing with it is making an effort to try to put your finger on, well, what's the cause of this? What happened? And I'm not saying that's always going to bring closure, but I'm saying that's usually part of the process, is trying to pin a finger. But in this case, due to an act of nature, there's no pin in your finger. And the best that we can do is to try to join together and help each other, to help a neighbor. And so if you feel moved to do that, just kind of swipe up on your podcast app, and the link will be in the show notes, and you can do that there. Thanks so much for joining me this week in the theater. I'll make sure I save a seat for you and a friend next week. Let's raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.